Garrett Nolan wasn't planning to stay just long enough to forget who he used to be. The tiny mountain town of Havenridge was nothing like Manhattan. No glass towers, no boardroom battles, no fake smiles over overpriced cocktails. Just a crooked little cabin tucked between pine trees and silence. That's what he wanted: silence. Peace. A break from the pressure of being the youngest tech millionaire to sell his company before 30. He hadn't told a soul where he was going. No staff, no assistants. He'd left the penthouse behind, traded tailored suits for flannel shirts, and paid cash for the cabin. He wasn't running away, he just needed to breathe. The last thing he expected was her. "Hey. That's my driveway you're blocking." Garrett turned from unloading firewood out of the back of his truck and caught sight of her barefoot, in jeans with a paint-splattered tank top, and a scowl that didn't match the sunshine in her voice. She was standing at the edge of his gravel drive, holding a mug and a paintbrush. "I'm sorry," he said, brushing wood dust off his hands. "Didn't realize it curved that far over." "It does, you're new, I get it." She crossed her arms, but her mouth twitched like she was holding back a laugh. "I'm Ava Langley. I live in the blue house next door." Garrett followed her gaze. "A small farmhouse with a white fence and a wild garden full of sunflowers." "Garrett," he said, "I'm just here for a while." Ava looked him up and down. "You're not from around here?" "Nope," she squinted. "You some kind of reclusive author or something," he chuckled. "Or something." She grinned and took a sip from her mug. "Well, Garrett or something, you're officially forgiven for blocking my driveway. Just don't do it again." And with that, she turned and wandered back through the trees, humming as she went. Garrett stood there for a long second, staring after her. Peace and quiet, huh? The next few days passed in a strange blur of chopping wood, fixing up the fireplace, and watching Ava from a distance. She kept to herself, but always had music playing loud enough to carry through the trees. He heard her singing, sometimes terribly, joyfully. She hosted painting classes in her backyard on weekends for kids. Her laugh came easy. Garrett didn't mean to linger by the fence so often. But every time he thought about going back to the city, he found himself listening for her voice instead. One morning, while walking to town for coffee, he spotted her struggling with a ladder outside her porch. "You're gonna crack your head open," he called. Ava glanced down, balancing a tangled mess of Christmas lights. "And you're gonna miss your coffee." "I can be late," he said, walking up and grabbing the base of the ladder. "You need help?" She looked at him, skeptical but grateful. "I'm trying to hang these before my niece gets here. She thinks I live in a snow globe." "Cute," he said, holding the ladder steady. "You got family close." Ava looped the lights over a nail. "Just my sister and her daughter. They come every December. I try to make the place magical." Garrett tilted his head. "Seems like it already is." She paused, then looked down at him. "You always this charming, only when I'm holding ladders." She laughed, full and real. "Okay, I'll give you that." After that, he started seeing her more. They'd bump into each other at the local diner. She'd drop off cookies on his porch. He'd bring her firewood when snow started falling harder. One evening, she invited him over for dinner. "I make a mean chili," she said, handing him a bowl and a beer. Her house was warm and chaotic, with paintings leaning against the walls and candles burning in mismatched jars. He felt comfortable, like he belonged there somehow. "You ever gonna tell me what you really do?" she asked, curled up on the couch with her feet tucked under her. Garrett looked at her, saw the way the firelight made her hair glow gold. He hesitated. "I used to run a tech company," he said. "Sold it last year. I needed a break from all the noise." Ava raised an eyebrow. "So you're rich," he laughed. "I guess." She didn't flinch, didn't ask how much. Just nodded slowly. "Money doesn't fix everything." "No," he said. "But peace helps." They sat in silence for a moment, then she looked at him, really looked at him. "You came here to disappear, didn't you?" "Yeah," he whispered. "Well," she said, standing and grabbing their empty bowls. "Too late for that, I see you." That night he couldn't sleep. He'd thought coming here would be about running away, but now it felt like he was finally arriving somewhere that mattered. And it had everything to do with the girl next door who sang off-key, painted like her soul was on fire, and didn't care that he used to be someone that made headlines. He saw her again the next morning. This time, she was standing in his driveway. "You're blocking mine again," she said, grinning. He smiled. "Maybe I did it on purpose." "You know," she said, walking closer, "you're not as mysterious as you think." Garrett tilted his head. No, you're just a guy trying not to feel lonely." He didn't say anything. She stepped even closer. "Me too." Something shifted between them, then something unspoken, something real. He reached out, brushing a snowflake from her hair. "I'm glad you're my neighbor," he said, voice low. Ava looked up at him. "Me too." And just like that, the peace he came looking for didn't feel so empty anymore. Garrett hadn't planned on staying through the holidays. But on the morning of December 15th, he stood in the middle of Havenridge's snowy Main Street, holding a pine wreath Ava had made and wondering when exactly everything in his life had shifted. The local hardware store had started carrying Christmas trees out front, and Ava had dragged him there before sunrise to help her pick the least lopsided one. Now it sat in the back of her pickup, leaning slightly but covered in twinkling lights and pine cones tied with red ribbon. "You're quiet," she said, sliding her gloved hands into her coat pockets as they walked past the bakery, which already had a line wrapped around the corner. "Regretting letting me rope you into tree duty?" Garrett glanced at her. Her cheeks were pink from the cold and her breath curled in the air like spun sugar. "Not even a little, just thinking." Ava stopped walking. "Dangerous pastime, I know," he said, "but I mean it. This place, he paused. "You make things feel different." She tilted her head, then nudged him with her shoulder. "Different how?" "Like I don't need to keep running." Ava didn't answer at first, then she looked ahead toward the town square where a group of kids were building a snow fort near the gazebo. "You're not the only one who's been running." He didn't ask. She didn't offer. But something settled between them anyway, a quiet understanding that some wounds didn't need words to be seen. Later that evening, as Garrett lit the fireplace in Ava's living room, he noticed a stack of canvases leaning against the far wall. Most were unfinished, bold swipes of color and half-formed shapes, but one caught his eye. It was a portrait, raw and striking. A woman with tired eyes and lips pressed into a near smile. It looked nothing like Ava, and yet something about it felt deeply personal. "Is she someone you knew?" he asked. Ava, who had been stringing popcorn garlands near the window, hesitated. "My mom." Garrett turned. "She passed," Ava nodded. 3 winters ago. Cancer, fast and cruel. I moved back to Havenridge to take care of her during her last months. After she was gone, I couldn't bring myself to leave again." He stepped closer, not touching the painting but letting his gaze linger on the emotion captured in the strokes. "She looks strong." "She was," Ava said quietly. "She taught me everything I know about fighting for the life you want." Garrett didn't speak. He didn't need to. Instead, he crossed the room and stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth from his chest. "I'm glad you stayed," he said. Ava looked over her shoulder. "Even if it means I make you hang wreaths and untangle lights." He gave a low laugh, the kind that rumbled in his throat. "Especially because of that." The next day, Havenridge was hit with a snowstorm. Thick, heavy flakes blanketed the trees, and power flickered in and out all across town. Garrett lit candles while Ava heated soup on the gas stove. They shared a blanket on the couch, and she read aloud from a dog-eared book of poetry she found in her mother's old trunk. Her voice dipped and rose over the words, and Garrett found himself watching her lips more than listening to the lines. "You're staring," she whispered, closing the book. "You caught me." Ava turned her head and looked at him without flinching. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I used to believe I had everything: money, recognition, control, but it always felt like I was performing someone else's idea of success. Here with you, I feel real." Ava's expression softened. "I like real." He reached for her hand. "Then let me stay a little longer." She curled her fingers through his. "You'd better." The storm lasted through the night. In the morning, they walked into town to help shovel sidewalks with the neighbors. Garrett dug into the snow beside an elderly man who owned the antique shop, while Ava organized hot cocoa for the volunteers. "She's the heart of this town, you know," the shop owner said, leaning on his shovel. "Took a while for her to come back to life after her mother died. But once she did, she poured herself into every corner of Havenridge." Garrett looked across the street where Ava was laughing with a group of teenagers, her braid dusted with snow. "Yeah," he murmured, "I can see that." That afternoon, Ava invited him to her studio for the first time. It was tucked behind her house in what used to be a tool shed, now transformed into a space full of color and light. Canvases lined the walls, brushes stood in mason jars, and sketches covered the floor in a scattered mosaic. "I come here when I need to think," she said, tugging off her gloves. "Or when I want to remember who I am." Garrett stepped inside, careful not to touch anything. "It's beautiful." She picked up a small canvas and handed it to him. It was a painting of the cabin where he was staying, snow-covered roof, chimney smoking, and a single beam of golden light spilling from the window. "I painted this the night you arrived," Ava said. "Didn't know why, just felt something shift." Garrett stared at it, struck by the quiet intimacy in the brushwork. "You felt me coming?" "I felt something coming," she replied. "Didn't expect it to have a beard and a mysterious past." He laughed, setting the painting gently down. "You're full of surprises." Ava tilted her head, her tone softening. "So are you." That night they sat by the fire again, silence stretching between them like a thread pulled taut. Finally, Garrett turned to her. "I didn't think I could fall this fast," he said. "But I'm not just here for peace anymore." Ava met his gaze, steady and clear. "I know." He reached for her, and this time she didn't hesitate. The kiss was slow, certain, like the storm had passed and something solid had taken root beneath the snow. Garrett didn't know what tomorrow would bring or what might pull him back toward the life he'd left behind, but for now he wasn't running. Not from her, not from himself. And as he held Ava in the flickering firelight, he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going anywhere. Garrett stood on the porch of the cabin, staring out into the snow-covered woods, his breath fogging in the cold air. He hadn't planned on waking up with Ava's head on his chest and her fingers tangled with his. And yet, when he'd opened his eyes just before dawn, that's exactly how it had been. He'd left her sleeping, not because he wanted space, but because something in his chest was starting to ache in a way he didn't recognize, like the quiet life he'd come searching for had grown roots deeper than he was ready to admit. By the time he made his way back to her place, the town's annual winter market was in full swing. Booths lined the square, strung with lights and garlands. The air was rich with the scent of roasted chestnuts and spiced cider. He spotted Ava near one of the craft stalls, bundled in a thick cream scarf, talking to a woman with a clipboard. "There you are," she said as soon as she caught sight of him. "I was about to come drag you out myself." He glanced around at the throngs of people laughing and shopping. "This is a lot more than I expected." "You haven't seen anything yet," she said, passing him a cup of cider. "There's a live nativity later, and horses dressed like reindeer pulling sleighs. It's absurd. You'll love it." He took a sip, then leaned closer to her ear. "You always this festive?" She looked up at him. "Only when I'm in a good mood." Garrett smiled, but before he could say more, a man approached with a camera slung over his neck. "Ava, can I steal you for a second? We need a photo of the volunteers." She hesitated, then looked to Garrett. "You mind?" "Go," he said, waving her on. "I'll find you after." As she walked away, Garrett wandered through the market, stopping near a stall selling antique books. He flipped through a worn leather-bound collection of essays, but his mind wasn't on the pages. "Didn't expect to see you here." The voice came from his left, and when he turned, he saw a man in his early 40s with sharp features and a coat too expensive for Havenridge. Garrett's stomach dropped. "Ethan," he said, jaw tightening. "How the hell did you find me?" Ethan stepped forward, brushing snow from his sleeves. "You really thought disappearing without a word wouldn't cause waves?" I needed out. You walked away from a multi-million-dollar acquisition and vanished. Shareholders are nervous. The board's been in chaos. I don't care, Garrett said, voice flat. Well, you should, Ethan said. You're still legally tied to the company, and your silence is making people ask questions. Garrett folded his arms. You came all the way out here to lecture me. I came because your name still carries weight, and because you're blowing everything you built just to play lumberjack in a snow globe. Garrett's hands clenched. Maybe I'm finally doing something that feels like mine. Before Ethan could reply, Ava returned, cheeks flushed from the wind. Hey, she said, glancing between them. Everything okay? Garrett hesitated for a beat. Yeah, Ava, this is Ethan. He's a mistake. Ethan cut in, extending a hand. Business associate. Ava shook it politely. Nice to meet you. Ethan's eyes flicked between them, calculating. You're the reason he's still here. Garrett stepped forward. That's enough. Ethan raised his hands. Just stating the obvious, you've got a life back in New York, Garrett. People who depend on you, you can't hide in the woods forever. I'm not hiding, Garrett said. I'm choosing. Ethan gave a tight nod. Then choose wisely. He walked off, disappearing into the crowd. Ava turned to Garrett. Friend of yours? Not exactly. Want to talk about it? He looked at her, the weight of his old life pressing down on his chest. Not here. They left the market and walked in silence back toward her house. Inside, Garrett paced near the windows while Ava peeled off her coat. You don't have to explain, she said gently. No, I do. He ran a hand through his hair. I built something I thought would make me happy. It didn't. I sold it, thinking I'd feel free. I didn't. Then I came here, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to be anything for anyone. She crossed the room and rested her hand on his arm. You don't owe me an apology for a past you're still trying to understand. He looked down at her. But I need you to know I didn't lie to you. I just didn't want what I used to be to define who I am now. I get that, she said, but you can't keep both lives in separate boxes. Eventually they'll collide. They already did, he said quietly. And I'm terrified that when they do, I'll lose this. Ava's expression didn't soften, it sharpened with something fierce and unflinching. Then don't run from it, face it, decide who you want to be, and if I'm part of that, you fight for me. Garrett felt something crack open in his chest. Not fear, not regret, resolve. I won't lose you, he said, then prove it. That night he didn't go back to the cabin. He stayed, helping her replace a broken window pane that had cracked in the wind. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. When it was done, Ava leaned against the doorframe, watching him sweep up the shards of glass. I'm not looking for a fairy tale, she said. I've built something real here. I won't pretend it doesn't matter just because someone shows up with a complicated past. I don't expect you to, Garrett said, but I want to be part of it, for real, no hiding. Then you'd better start telling the truth about everything, he nodded once. Tomorrow, Ava raised an eyebrow. I'll make a call, he said. I'll clean up what I left behind, but after that, I'm done with pretending. She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped forward and pressed her lips to his, soft but certain. It wasn't a promise, it was a challenge, and he was ready to rise to it. Garrett stood at the edge of the frozen lake, phone pressed to his ear as the wind carved through the pines behind him. His breath came slow, steady. Each word he spoke was deliberate. Yes, I'm stepping down completely. Finalize the documents, my shares, my seat, everything. I'm done. A pause. Then a clipped response from the other end. No, this isn't sudden. What's sudden is realizing I spent years building something that never saw me. I don't want to be a figurehead in a world I've outgrown. He ended the call, thumb lingering over the screen before slipping the phone into his coat pocket. The lake stretched before him in perfect stillness, the winter sun low and pale behind the ridge. Ava had said she needed truth. He'd given it. As he turned to head back toward her house, his boots crunching over the thin trail of snow, he noticed a figure waiting near her porch steps. Not Ava. A girl maybe 7 or 8 wrapped in a puffy coat with a purple beanie pulled low over her ears. Garrett quickened his pace. Hey there, he said, stopping a few feet away. The girl grinned up at him. You're the guy who makes Aunt Ava laugh like she means it, he blinked. I didn't realize I was that obvious. She tilted her head. She talks about you when she thinks no one's listening. Garrett crouched to her level, and you must be Lily. The girl nodded like she was used to being right. Mom says I'm not supposed to interrogate people, but I'm just checking to see if you're good enough. He raised a brow. That's so? She's my favorite person, Lily said, brushing snow from her sleeves. And I don't want her heart turned to mush by someone who doesn't stay. His chest tightened. I don't plan on going anywhere. Good, Lily said, because she already made your face into a painting. That usually means she's in trouble. Before Garrett could ask more, the front door opened. Ava stood there, her cheeks flushed, her hair pulled back with a pencil stuck through it. I see you've met my niece, she said. She's thorough, Garrett replied. Lily beamed as she skipped past them into the house, leaving the door wide. Ava stepped out onto the porch. She's been dying to meet you. She thinks I've been hiding you like some sort of secret treasure. He climbed the steps. I think she's got a future in high-level negotiations. She gets it from my sister, Ava said. Don't let the puffy coat fool you, Garrett hesitated. I made the call. She met his gaze without asking what call. I walked away completely, he said. No strings, no fallback plan. I'm not split down the middle anymore. Ava didn't reach for him. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She just let it sit between them, dense and real. I didn't ask you to give it all up, she said. No, he replied, but I needed to, for me. I'm not interested in building something that doesn't feel like mine anymore, she nodded slowly. So what now, he said. I figure out what it means to live fully, not as an escape, not as a pause, just life. Her eyes searched his. Does that include me? He stepped forward, closing the last bit of space between them. It only works if it does. Ava exhaled, and it wasn't relief, it was something deeper, like the release of a breath she hadn't admitted she'd been holding. Well, she said, you're in luck. I have some ideas about what life could look like. He leaned against the porch railing beside her. Tell me, she nodded toward the backyard. We're painting a mural in town next week. The library's letting me put one up on the outer wall. I want it to feel like a story you can walk through. You want help? I want someone who won't get bored halfway through. I can handle that. And I want you to teach me how to make pancakes without setting off the smoke alarm, Garrett laughed. That's a tall order. I believe in miracles. They watched the sun dip through the trees, casting long amber shadows over the snow. A hawk cut across the sky in a wide arc, wings slicing the pale gold air. Ava turned to him. You know, I used to think love was something that belonged to other people, people who didn't carry ghosts in their pockets. I used to think peace was something you had to earn by giving everything up, Garrett said. Turns out it's just about choosing the right person to share it with. She reached for his hand, her fingers curling through his. Stay tonight, she said. No storm, no excuse, just stay, he smiled. I already left everything behind. All that's left is you. The next morning, Havenridge woke to a sky so blue it looked painted. Garrett stood in the center of the town square with Ava at his side, watching a crane lift the first panel of her mural into place. Swirls of color stretched across the wooden canvas, a field of wildflowers, an open door, a lake kissed by winter light. Lily ran circles around them, laughing with a ribbon tied to her wrist. Ava looked up at Garrett. It's not perfect, but it's mine. He wrapped an arm around her waist. I wouldn't change a thing. Later that evening, the townspeople gathered for the mural's unveiling. Children pointed at the painted figures, and couples took photos under a painted archway of trees. Ava stood on a small platform, explaining the story behind each scene, her voice strong and sure. When she stepped down, Garrett was waiting with something tucked inside his coat pocket. He handed her a flat velvet box. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single silver key, polished and simple. I had the cabin redone, he said. New windows, new wood stove, it's warm now, quiet. Ours if you want it. Ava looked up, eyes wide. I'm not asking you to move in, he said quickly. I'm asking you to build something with me, not someday, now. She closed the box and slid her fingers under his collar, pulling him down until their foreheads met. "Yes," she whispered. Garrett kissed her like a promise. The crowd clapped behind them. Lily whooped from somewhere near the hot cider table. But for Garrett, there was only the feel of Ava's hand in his and the knowledge that after years of chasing freedom, he'd finally found it, not in silence, not in distance. But in her. Garrett adjusted the cuff of his shirt, the navy wool of his tailored coat catching a golden thread of sunlight as he waited beside the fountain in Havenridge's town square. The winter chill was crisp, but the air held the first hint of spring. The snow had begun to melt in soft patches along the sidewalks, revealing damp earth and the early bloom of crocuses along Ava's fence line. He hadn't worn a suit in over a year, but tonight wasn't about business. Tonight was about showing up fully, completely for the life he'd chosen. The past was no longer pulling him in two directions. He'd sold the penthouse, donated most of his wardrobe, and wrapped up every legal tether to the company that once consumed him. Now, the only thing that mattered was her. "Garrett," Ava called, her voice carrying over the cobblestone. He turned just as she stepped off the porch of the town hall, her boots clicking lightly against the stone. She wore a forest green dress with a scarf tucked casually around her shoulders, her hair swept up in a loose twist with wild tendrils framing her face. She looked radiant, but it wasn't elegance that made him stare, it was the way her eyes lit up when they landed on his. "I didn't expect a coat that nice," she said, stopping beside him. He reached into the inner pocket and pulled out a folded square of paper. "You'll be happy to know I only brought one. The rest went to a charity auction in the city." Ava raised a brow. "You really did torch the bridge. Didn't need it anymore." He handed her the paper, and speaking of burning things down, she unfolded it slowly. Inside was a sketch, a rough but tender rendering of a gallery space. Wide open windows. A long wall with blank canvases hung in staggered rows. A central sculpture stand. And at the bottom, in his handwriting, were the words, "Langley Nolan Studio." She looked up, stunned. "You drew this." "I had help with the proportions," he admitted, "but the concept is mine. There's an old train depot on the south end of town. I bought it yesterday." "You bought a building?" "Technically, I bought a dream," he said. "I want to turn it into a gallery and studio space. For your work, for the kids' classes, for visiting artists, for you to have something bigger than the shed behind your house." Ava stared at him, the sketch trembling slightly in her hands. "Why?" "Because I want to build something that carries your name, something permanent. Something that stays." Her voice came quiet. "You already gave me the cabin." He stepped closer, his palms brushing hers. "That was for us. This is for you." She leaned into him slowly, resting her forehead against his. "I've never let anyone give me something like this before. I'm not just giving it," he said. "I'm investing in it, in you, in the future we're making." Ava closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they shimmered with something fierce and vulnerable. "Then I guess we'd better start planning the opening." They walked hand in hand to the town hall, where the community had gathered for the annual spring renewal dinner. Inside, long tables were set with mismatched chairs, strings of paper lanterns swaying gently from the wooden beams. Children darted between the legs of chairs, and the scent of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filled the air. As Garrett helped a neighbor carry a tray of cider to the drink table, Ava slipped behind the makeshift microphone stand and clinked her spoon against a glass. "Before we eat," she said, "I just want to say something." The room quieted. Garrett turned, surprised. "I used to believe that life handed you only so much happiness," she began. "That if you got a little, you shouldn't expect more. But this past year proved me wrong." She glanced toward Garrett, her voice steady. "When someone sees you not just your talent or your smile, but the parts you keep hidden and chooses to stay anyway, that's not luck, that's love." A hush fell over the room. "So if anyone here's been waiting for a sign to stop holding back, to start saying yes instead of maybe, this is it. Life doesn't wait for perfect timing. It waits for courage." Garrett stood frozen, his heart pounding. Ava turned to him. "Garrett Nolan, come up here." Lily cheered from the back of the room and he laughed, crossing to the front. When he reached her, she took both his hands. You once told me peace wasn't something you could chase. It had to be built. You were right. And I want to keep building it with you. He bent his head slightly. Are you proposing to me? Not quite, she said, but I am asking if you'll be mine, fully, publicly, wildly. He didn't hesitate. Always. The crowd erupted in applause as they kissed, soft and sure, surrounded by the warmth of everyone who had watched them grow into something real. Months passed. The gallery opened in June with a line out the door. Ava's mural from the library had been converted into a centerpiece installation, and a rotating wall displayed work from local and visiting artists. Children's laughter echoed weekly during the art camps she hosted, and Garrett worked beside her, never over her handling logistics, building furniture from reclaimed wood and brewing enough coffee to keep the place humming. They moved into the cabin full-time after building a sunroom onto the back where Ava could paint and Garrett could read in the light that filtered through the trees. There were no more secrets, no more running, no more pretending that love had to be earned in grand gestures or public victories. It was in the way she handed him a paintbrush when he looked overwhelmed, in the way he reached for her hand under the table during gallery meetings, in the way they chose each other every single day. One afternoon, just as the leaves were beginning to turn again, Garrett found Ava sketching by the lake. He sat beside her, watching as she drew a small cottage tucked between trees with a swing hanging from an oak and a garden wrapped around the porch. "What's that?" he asked. She smiled. "A place we haven't built yet." He kissed her temple. "Then let's get started," and they did together.